A wealthy businessman, overwhelmed by grief and pressure from his collapsing empire, secretly installs hidden cameras throughout his mansion, convinced that the quiet maid he hired might be doing something wrong when he's not home. His plan? To catch her in the act and fire her without question. But when he finally sits down to watch the footage late one night, what he sees leaves him completely frozen. Instead of wrongdoing, he witnesses something he never expected, a moment so real, so moving, that it changes everything he thought he knew about loyalty, care, and the people around him. Alone in the dark, eyes locked on the screen, he realizes this woman he barely trusted is the only reason his fragile twin sons are still safe, still smiling, and still alive. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Richard Coleman and his wife, Emily, had been trying to have a baby for many years. They went through a long and difficult journey, filled with disappointment and hope. They visited many doctors and paid for expensive treatments that often didn't work. They traveled to clinics in different cities, always chasing the chance to become parents. Every time they thought it might finally happen, they were let down again. It was emotionally exhausting for both of them. They watched other people have children while they continued to wait, but one day their dream finally came true. They received the news that Emily was pregnant with twins. It was the happiest moment of their lives. They cried, hugged, and celebrated together. Even though doctors warned them about the risks involved, they remained hopeful. Emily was determined to carry the babies to full term. Richard promised to stay by her side through everything. After all the waiting and heartbreak, this pregnancy meant everything to them. Emily's pregnancy was not easy. From the beginning, she faced many health problems. The doctors monitored her closely, and she had to spend a lot of time in the hospital. Richard visited her every day, always worried but trying to be strong for her. Emily followed every instruction the doctors gave, hoping to protect the babies. Each day felt long and stressful. She had to rest most of the time and couldn't enjoy a normal pregnancy. Even simple things, like walking, became difficult for her. Still, she never gave up. Her goal was to bring their twins safely into the world. As the due date got closer, her condition became more serious. Doctors decided to keep her in the hospital full-time, under constant observation. Richard stayed as much as he could, holding her hand and talking to her about their future as a family. Despite everything, they kept believing that the outcome would be positive and that their dream would come true soon. The day of the birth finally arrived. It was a complicated and stressful day. The medical team was ready, knowing that there were many risks involved. Emily was taken to the operating room for a special procedure to deliver the twins. Richard waited outside, feeling nervous and scared. Hours went by, and he didn't know what was happening inside. Finally, a nurse came out and told him that the babies had been born. Their names were Noah and Ethan. They were small but healthy. Richard was allowed to see them and hold them in his arms. It was the first time he saw their faces, and it was an unforgettable moment. He felt happiness and love like never before, but that joy didn't last long. A doctor came to talk to him with serious news. Emily had suffered a major hemorrhage during the procedure. Despite the doctor's efforts, she didn't survive. Richard's world fell apart in a matter of seconds. As he held his newborn sons in his arms, Richard felt a mix of emotions that were hard to explain. He looked at their tiny faces full of life while thinking about the woman he had just lost. It was the best and worst moment of his life happening at the same time. He wanted to feel happy about the birth of Noah and Ethan, but the pain of losing Emily was too strong. He didn't know whether to cry from sadness or smile from joy. The hospital room felt heavy and time seemed to slow down. Richard tried to stay strong for his babies, even though his heart was broken. The nurses helped him as much as they could, but nothing could take away the pain. He kept thinking about all the dreams he and Emily had made together. Now he would have to face everything alone. The responsibility of raising two newborns suddenly became very real. When it was time to leave the hospital, Richard took Noah and Ethan home. The ride back was quiet. He looked at the empty seat where Emily should have been. At home, the mansion felt cold and silent. It used to be full of life when Emily was there. Now, every room reminded him of her. He placed the babies in their crib and sat down, feeling completely overwhelmed. The silence made everything worse. He could hear the small sounds of the babies, but not the voice of the woman he loved. Richard didn't know how he would manage everything. He was tired, both emotionally and physically. The weight of what had happened was crushing, but at the same time, he knew he had to be strong. Noah and Ethan needed him. He didn't have a choice. Even though he was full of grief, he was also a father now. His life had changed forever. In the following days, Richard tried to adjust to his new reality. Every morning, he woke up early to take care of the babies. Feeding them, changing them, and putting them to sleep became his new routine. He had help from nurses, but it still felt like too much at times. He missed Emily every second. Sometimes he would talk to her picture, telling her what had happened during the day. The house no longer felt like a home without her. Friends and family came to visit, offering their support, but nothing could truly fill the emptiness. Richard kept going because he had to. He looked at his sons and saw a part of Emily in them. That gave him some strength. The pain was still there, but he tried not to let it stop him. He was determined to raise Noah and Ethan the best way he could, even if it meant doing it all alone. The road ahead was uncertain, but he kept moving forward. The twins came home under the care of their private pediatrician, Dr. Whitmore. He was very confident in his work and often spoke with a tone that made him seem sure of everything. From the first visit, he said the babies were doing well. He didn't ask too many questions and didn't seem concerned about anything unusual. Richard accepted this with some relief. After everything that had happened, he wanted to believe that his sons were healthy. He was tired, emotionally and physically, and he didn't have the energy to doubt the doctor's words. Trusting Dr. Whitmore made things feel more under control. Richard used the time to focus on getting back to his daily routine. He had many responsibilities with his businesses and was still trying to process the loss of Emily. The house was quiet most of the time, except for the usual sounds of the babies. Richard tried to balance everything, thinking he was managing the situation the best he could, even if it didn't feel easy. At first, Richard had hired a few nurses to help with the babies. They were there to support him during the first days at home. They fed the twins, helped with bath time, and made sure everything stayed in order, but their work was only temporary, and after a few days, they left. Richard thought he could manage things on his own after that, especially with the doctor saying the twins were fine. But the routine quickly became too hard. He had to split his attention between the babies, the house, and his business problems. It was exhausting. Realizing that he needed help, Richard hired Grace Miller. She came to work in a quiet way, not asking too many questions and not trying to interfere. She took care of the house, cleaned and handled daily chores. Richard was grateful for the help, even though he didn't say much. Grace worked silently and carefully, always paying attention to everything around her, especially the baby's behavior. Grace noticed things that Richard and Dr. Whitmore had not. She saw that the twins didn't seem as strong as they should be. They cried a lot, sometimes for long periods without stopping. It wasn't the usual kind of crying. It sounded like they were in pain or very uncomfortable. Grace also saw that they were not feeding properly. They kept turning their heads away from the bottle and seemed to have trouble swallowing. She tried to mention her concerns, but Richard was too busy or distracted to hear her fully. He believed Dr. Whitmore, who had said the twins were healthy. Grace didn't want to go against the doctor, but she couldn't ignore what she was seeing. Every day, she paid closer attention, writing down when the babies cried, how long it lasted, and how much they ate. She felt that something wasn't right, even though no one else seemed to notice. Her quiet observations became more serious as the days went on. While Grace was keeping an eye on the babies, Richard's attention was pulled in another direction. One of his companies was facing serious trouble. He had built his businesses over the years, and now one of them was showing signs of financial instability. This added a huge amount of stress to his life. Every day he received calls and messages from his office. Meetings had to be planned. Problems needed quick decisions. Richard tried to focus, but his mind was divided. He was still grieving, still adjusting to life as a single parent, and now had to solve business problems that could cost him a lot of money. He felt pressure from all sides. It was hard to sleep, hard to think clearly, and hard to stay calm. At home, he tried to act like everything was fine. He trusted that the doctor was doing his job, that the babies were okay, and that Grace was handling the rest. But inside, he was beginning to feel overwhelmed again. Each morning started early. Richard woke up tired, often after a night of broken sleep. He would check his phone first, reading messages from his business team. Then he would go to check on the twins. Sometimes they were awake, crying softly. Sometimes Grace had already taken care of them. He appreciated her help, even if he didn't say much. He was the kind of person who kept his feelings quiet. As the days went on, Richard started to notice that the babies were not improving. They still looked weak. He wondered if it was normal, but then reminded himself the doctor. Whitmore had said everything was fine. He wanted to believe it, so he pushed away his doubts. He focused on solving the problems at work, answering emails, making decisions, and trying to save what he had built. But no matter how much he worked, there was always more to do. The stress didn't go away. It only got heavier. Grace continued to work silently in the background. She was careful not to push Richard, but she became more worried. The babies didn't smile, didn't move as much as she thought they should. Feeding time was always difficult. She felt like they were getting weaker. Dr. Whitmore came for his regular visits and stayed only a short time. He always said the same thing. The twins were fine. Grace didn't understand how he could be so sure without looking deeper. She didn't feel comfortable challenging him, especially because Richard trusted him so much. Still, she knew something was wrong. She cleaned the house, prepared meals, and stayed near the twins as much as she could. She listened to their cries and watched their faces. Every day, she felt more certain that they needed more attention. But in a house filled with silence, grief, and stress, her quiet concern remained unnoticed. She kept hoping someone would finally realize what she already knew. Grace began her work in the mansion by putting everything back in order. The house had been messy and disorganized since Emily's death. Rooms were left untouched, laundry had piled up, and dust had settled in corners that no one noticed anymore. Grace started by cleaning each area carefully. She washed clothes, folded them, and placed everything where it belonged. She rearranged the kitchen and made sure the nursery was clean and quiet. Her routine was steady and simple, but it helped bring some structure back to the house. She didn't talk much and stayed focused on her tasks. Every room reminded her of the sadness that filled the house, but she kept working. Richard barely spoke to her. He gave short instructions before leaving for work and did not stay long at home. His mind was on his business problems, and he didn't seem to notice what was happening around him. Grace continued her work, trying to make the home a better place, even in silence. Richard remained distant and quiet. He often left early in the morning, dressed in a hurry, speaking only when necessary. He was dealing with serious problems in his company and had little energy left for anything else. Grace watched as he walked out the door each day, always looking tired and stressed. He barely looked at the twins. When he came home, he would give a few quick updates or instructions, then disappear into his office or room. The house felt heavy with silence. Grace didn't expect much communication from him, but it was clear that he was not coping well. He avoided long conversations and didn't ask about the babies. Grace was left to manage everything on her own. She fed the twins, changed them, and tracked their behavior. It was hard to know what Richard was thinking, but she could see that he was still deeply affected by Emily's death. He had lost more than a wife. He had lost balance, direction, and peace in his life. As the days passed, Grace began to worry more and more about the twins. Noah and Ethan didn't seem healthy. They cried for long periods, and it wasn't the normal kind of crying. It was intense, almost painful. They seemed uncomfortable all the time. Grace held them, tried to feed them, and kept track of their weight. She noticed that both were getting thinner. Their little bodies were weaker, and they weren't as active as before. She also noticed that they had low fevers, and sometimes they refused to drink the formula completely. All of this made her feel anxious. She wasn't a nurse or a doctor, but she knew something wasn't right. She tried to share her observations with Dr. Whitmore during his visits, but he didn't listen. He would brush off her concerns, saying the babies were just sensitive or going through a normal phase. But Grace didn't believe that anymore. She could see the difference in their appearance and behavior. Something was clearly wrong. Dr. Whitmore treated Grace's comments with disrespect. Every time she tried to talk about the twins' feeding problems, their constant crying, or the signs of fever, he responded as if her thoughts didn't matter. He barely listened before interrupting her or changing the subject. He often reminded her that he was the expert, and she was only the housekeeper. Grace felt frustrated, but didn't argue. She stayed quiet and let him finish his visits, even though nothing was improving. The twins' condition was getting worse, not better. Still, Dr. Whitmore continued to say everything was fine. Grace found it difficult to trust him. She wanted to do something more, but she wasn't sure what was possible. Richard continued to believe in the doctor's judgment and didn't notice the changes in the babies. Grace was left with her growing worry and no one who would take her seriously. Every day she hoped the situation would improve, but her fear only became stronger. While working around the house, Grace often found her thoughts drifting back to her past. The sight of the fragile twins reminded her of her own daughter, who had passed away years before. That loss had left a deep mark on her, and the memories still came back often. She thought about how hard it had been to survive after everything fell apart. She had left an abusive relationship that nearly destroyed her. It had taken all her strength to run away and start over. At the time, she had no support. Her family had turned their backs on her, and she had no money. She had to work any job she could find just to get by. Those were dark times, filled with fear and loneliness. Taking care of Noah and Ethan brought some of those feelings back, but it also gave her purpose again. Even though the job was hard and no one truly listened to her, she felt responsible for the babies. She didn't want to see them suffer. Grace used her pain from the past to stay strong in the present. She didn't talk about her history, but it was always with her. The house, the babies, and the silence reminded her of the struggles she had gone through. She stayed focused and calm, even when things became more difficult. She didn't complain, didn't ask for anything, and didn't expect thanks. Her goal was to keep the house running and to make sure the babies were safe. Even when she was tired or felt invisible, she kept going. Every cry from Noah or Ethan pushed her to pay more attention. Every ignored warning from Dr. Whitmore made her more determined to keep watching closely. She didn't trust the doctor anymore, but she didn't know how to make Richard see the truth. All she could do was continue working, hoping that someone would notice what she already saw. Until then, she would not give up. She had already lost too much in life to let it happen again. The condition of the babies kept getting worse with each passing day. Grace noticed that Noah and Ethan were crying more often, and they looked even weaker than before. They were not eating properly, and they seemed tired all the time. Grace continued doing everything she could, feeding, cleaning, checking their temperature, but nothing seemed to help. She was very concerned, but no one was listening to her. Dr. Whitmore still gave short visits and quick answers, always saying everything was normal. Grace didn't believe him, but she had no power to change the situation. Richard, on the other hand, was barely present. He left early in the morning and came back late at night. He didn't spend time with the babies and didn't ask many questions. When he was home, he looked tired, distracted, and frustrated. Grace could see that he was dealing with a lot, but the twins needed help that they weren't getting. The days were long and tense, and Grace was starting to feel helpless. Richard was completely buried in the problems of his corporation. Every day, there were new negative reports on his desk. His company was losing money, and he was trying to hold things together. He had meetings almost non-stop. Some were in person, others by phone or video call. No matter how much he worked, the situation kept getting worse. His company's stock prices were falling, and investors were starting to lose trust in his leadership. They wanted fast solutions, and they were not willing to wait. Richard felt pressure from all sides. He had to make decisions quickly, but he wasn't sure if they were the right ones. This stress left him with very little energy for anything else. At home, he couldn't focus on the babies, and he didn't notice how serious things had become. His attention was on his company. He believed that once he fixed those problems, he would have time to care for the rest. But time kept passing, and nothing was improving. Even while he was busy with work, Richard began to notice small things in the house that didn't seem right. He would come home and see something moved or slightly out of place. A light left on, a drawer not closed. He didn't say anything at first, but after a few days, these little details started bothering him. His mind was already full of stress, so he began to question everything around him. Without any clear reason, he started to suspect Grace. He didn't have proof, and she had never done anything wrong, but his thoughts kept going in that direction. He wondered if she was hiding something or doing things behind his back. These ideas came mostly from his own anxiety, but they made him uneasy. He started watching her more closely, though he never said anything directly. Grace, however, could sense the change in his behavior. He had become more distant and cold, even more than before. The house no longer felt safe for anyone. Things became even more difficult when Emily's family entered the picture. They arrived with lawyers and started asking serious questions. They were worried about the twins and said that Richard might not be emotionally stable enough to care for them. They pointed to the current situation, his grief, the quiet house, and the lack of proper medical attention, as reasons for concern. Richard was shocked but tried to stay calm. Still, the pressure increased quickly. Soon, official documents arrived at the mansion. They mentioned the possibility of a custody dispute. This was something Richard hadn't expected. He already had too much to deal with, and now he had to think about losing his children. The stress became heavier than ever. He barely spoke to Grace and spent most of his time locked in his office. He was surrounded by legal papers and business files, trying to protect everything at once. The tension in the house grew stronger, and nothing felt normal anymore. Grace saw parts of what was happening, even if no one told her directly. She saw the lawyers arriving and leaving. She noticed Richard's serious face and the envelopes that came in the mail. She didn't ask questions, but she understood that something was wrong. The atmosphere in the house changed. Everyone was tense, and it felt like something bad could happen at any time. Grace kept working as usual. She prepared bottles, washed clothes, and checked on the babies, but she felt the weight of the situation. She had seen sadness and fear before, and she could feel it now, spreading through the house. The twins were still not getting better. Dr. Whitmore's visits didn't change anything. Grace began to fear that things would continue getting worse, both for the babies and for Richard. But she didn't speak up. She did her job quietly, watching everything, trying to help in the only way she could. No one asked for her opinion, so she stayed silent. Inside the mansion, everything felt heavy and uncertain. The days passed slowly, filled with stress, noise from crying babies, and silence between the adults. Richard was trapped between business disasters and legal problems. He couldn't find time to breathe or rest. Grace continued to notice that he trusted her less and less. He looked at her differently, with suspicion in his eyes. She didn't understand why, but she felt it clearly. Still, she didn't stop doing her tasks. She believed the babies needed her, especially now. She tried not to think about being blamed or accused. Her focus was on Noah and Ethan, even though no one appreciated her efforts. She felt alone again, like she had felt before when her life had fallen apart. But this time, she wasn't afraid of hard work. She just didn't know if it would be enough. Everyone in the house was holding on, barely making it through each day. The pressure kept growing, and there was no sign it would stop. With his suspicions growing stronger, Richard made the decision to install hidden cameras around the mansion. He placed them in several key areas, mainly the living room, kitchen, hallways, and nursery. He wanted to see exactly what Grace was doing when he wasn't around. He didn't tell her or anyone else. These cameras were meant to give him the truth, or at least peace of mind. Every evening, after returning from long and stressful meetings about his failing company, he would sit down and watch the footage. He was looking for anything unusual, anything that might confirm his doubts. What he saw, however, was far from what he expected. The videos showed Grace quietly going through her daily tasks. She cleaned the floors, did the laundry, folded clothes, cooked meals, and looked after the twins with care. There were no signs of bad behavior, no strange actions, nothing that explained the odd feeling he had. Even so, Richard didn't stop watching. He kept checking the recordings, unsure of what to believe. Richard's life had become a non-stop cycle of pressure and doubt. When he wasn't watching Grace on the camera recordings, he was in meetings with his corporate team. The financial problems were not going away. Each meeting brought new bad news, more losses, more investor complaints, and more urgent decisions. Richard felt the weight of the entire company on his back. Alongside this, he had to speak with lawyers who were preparing him for a possible custody battle. Emily's family was still pushing the idea that he was not emotionally stable enough to care for the twins. These discussions made Richard even more tense and distracted. He couldn't focus properly, and his time was split between business troubles, legal matters, and his growing paranoia about Grace. Every day, he felt like he was losing control. He couldn't see a clear solution to any of his problems. Everything felt like it was falling apart around him, and he didn't know who he could truly trust anymore. At the same time, the twins were not getting better. Both Noah and Ethan were showing signs of illness. They had a mild but persistent fever, and they seemed too sleepy during the day. They no longer showed much reaction to sounds or movement. Grace noticed that they were eating even less, and their small bodies looked thinner than before. She became more and more concerned with each passing hour. When Dr. Whitmore came for his short visits, she tried again to share what she was seeing. But as always, he minimized the symptoms. He said that fevers in babies were normal and that rest and fluids were enough. He didn't take the situation seriously and continued prescribing only basic care. Grace didn't agree, but she had no authority to challenge his decisions. She felt helpless. No one was truly listening, and the twins were clearly not improving. Every day she hoped Richard would finally see what was happening, but he seemed too distracted to notice the seriousness of the problem. Grace spent most of her time in the nursery, watching over Noah and Ethan. She would hold them when they cried, wipe their faces when they sweated, and try to comfort them when they seemed uncomfortable. She knew something was wrong. Their skin felt warmer than usual, and they were not feeding well at all. Often they refused the bottle or drank just a little before falling asleep again. She tried to keep the room calm and clean, hoping it would help. She kept a close eye on the clock, checking their temperature regularly and noting small changes. Still, no one responded to her concern. Dr. Whitmore remained dismissive. Richard didn't ask questions. He barely glanced at the babies before heading into his office. Grace was left alone with the responsibility, even though she was just the housekeeper. She took on the care of the twins, not because it was her job, but because she couldn't bear to see them in pain. Her worry only grew stronger. Although she tried to stay calm, Grace began to feel overwhelmed. She worked long hours, often without a break. The crying, the sickness, the lack of medical support, all of it was wearing her down. But she didn't stop. Every time one of the babies whimpered or refused to eat, her concern deepened. She knew they needed more than just fluids and rest. She felt sure that something important was being missed. She did everything she could to help them feel better, but it wasn't enough. The more she tried, the more she realized how serious things were becoming. She didn't have the tools or knowledge to treat them properly, and the person who did, Dr. Whitmore, refused to listen. She hoped Richard would change his mind and call another doctor, but he never did. He was too focused on his business and too busy watching her through the cameras. Grace didn't care about being watched. Her only concern was for the health of the twins, who were getting weaker every day. Back in his office, Richard continued reviewing the camera footage. Each night, after the house was quiet and everyone else was asleep, he would sit at his desk and watch Grace's movements. He saw her walking from room to room, cleaning, cooking, and mostly caring for the babies. He noticed how often she was in the nursery and how much time she spent trying to comfort the twins. Nothing looked suspicious, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He didn't know why. Maybe it was just the stress playing with his thoughts. Still, he couldn't let go of the idea that he needed to monitor everything. He convinced himself that it was necessary, that being cautious was the right thing. All the while, the twins' health continued to decline. He was watching Grace closely, but failing to see the real problem. His sons needed help that they weren't getting. Grace was doing her best, but without medical action, the situation was slowly slipping out of control. Grace spent most of her day focused on the twins. Every time one of them cried, she picked them up and held them close, trying to calm their discomfort. She rocked them gently and spoke to them in a soft, steady voice, hoping it would help them relax. Feeding them had become a slow and tiring process. She tried again and again to encourage them to drink even a little, but Noah and Ethan kept turning their heads away or pushing the bottle out with weak movements. Grace stayed patient, but inside she felt a growing fear. Taking care of them brought back memories she tried hard to forget. She remembered the nights she spent at the hospital with her own daughter, watching her struggle and wishing someone would pay attention to the warning signs. Those memories were painful, but they made her even more determined not to ignore anything happening with the twins. She didn't want history to repeat itself in that house. Whenever Grace looked at the babies' faces, she saw details that reminded her of the moments before she lost her daughter. She remembered how the doctor from her past had dismissed her concerns, saying it was nothing serious, and how she later learned he had been wrong. That experience had left a deep scar on her. Now, seeing Noah and Ethan refusing food and crying in exhaustion, she feared that the current situation was dangerously similar. She noticed how their bodies felt lighter each day, how their arms and legs seemed weaker, and how they slept far more than healthy babies normally would. These signs were impossible for her to ignore. Although she wasn't a trained medical professional, she remembered enough from her past to recognize the seriousness of the symptoms. She felt a mix of fear and anger, but she pushed those feelings aside so she could keep doing what needed to be done. Her priority remained the twins and their safety. As their condition worsened, Grace checked on them constantly. She observed their breathing, watched for any changes in their skin color, and placed her hand on their foreheads to confirm if the fever was rising. Every small detail mattered to her. She wrote down the times they cried the most and how long they went without eating. She paid attention to how they reacted to the bottle and how often they fell asleep in the middle of feeding. She kept track of everything in her mind, even when she didn't have the chance to rest. At the same time, she still had to manage all the housework. There were rooms to clean, laundry to wash, meals to prepare, and basic responsibilities that couldn't be ignored. Grace moved from one task to another without stopping, splitting her attention between taking care of the house and watching over the twins. It was exhausting, but she refused to slow down. The babies needed her too much. Grace's memories of her daughter were not just emotional. They shaped the way she handled every moment with Noah and Ethan. She remembered how she had felt helpless in the past, with no one willing to listen to her concerns. Because of that, she had learned to trust her instincts fully. She had promised herself she would never ignore signs of danger again. These instincts grew stronger each day as she watched the twins struggle. She felt responsible for them in a way that went deeper than her job. Every time she heard one of their weak cries, it stirred something inside her, a protective feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel since losing her child. It wasn't something she planned or expected. It just happened naturally. She knew they were not her children, but she cared for them with the same determination she once had for her own daughter. Their suffering awakened a side of her she thought she had buried forever. Even while she was doing simple tasks, like folding laundry, sweeping the floor, or preparing a bottle, Grace kept her ears open for any sound from the nursery. She moved quickly whenever she heard the slightest noise, afraid that one of the babies might need help. She sat by their crib during quiet moments, listening to their breathing and watching their tiny chests rise and fall. Sometimes she held both twins at once, one in each arm, hoping her warmth would comfort them. These moments reminded her of the nights when she sat beside her daughter's hospital bed, fighting sleep so she wouldn't miss any important change. The similarity between then and now made her chest tighten, but she pushed through the pain. She knew the twins needed constant attention, and she wasn't willing to let anything distract her from that. She felt a quiet determination with every step she took and every breath she heard from them. Her instincts guided everything she did. She couldn't ignore how fast the twins' condition was worsening, even if no one else seemed to notice. She carried them more often, kept them close, and did her best to soothe them when they trembled or cried in discomfort. She checked on them during the night and early in the morning, long before Richard woke up. She had learned through hard experience that a baby's health could change quickly, and if she wasn't alert, something serious could happen. Though she still had to keep the house running smoothly, her focus stayed on Noah and Ethan. She felt a deep responsibility to protect them, especially since they had no one else giving them the care they truly needed. Every action she took, every small movement, every decision came from that strong maternal instinct that had never disappeared. It was this instinct that kept her going, even when exhaustion tried to slow her down. The twins had been crying for a long time without stopping. Their cries sounded weaker than before, and their small bodies looked tired and worn out. Grace tried everything she could think of to help them feel better, rocking them gently, changing their positions, whispering to them softly, but nothing worked. Their eyes were half closed, and their arms barely moved. They were exhausted, and it was clear to her that their health was getting worse quickly. As she held them in her arms, one on each side, she felt how light they had become. Their bones pressed through their skin more than before, and their cries seemed to come from a place of pain. At that moment, something changed in Grace. She looked at them and knew she had to do something more. She remembered something important, something she had not thought about clearly until now. Even after the loss of her daughter, her body was still producing milk. She hadn't planned to use it again, but now it felt like the right choice. With no one else in the house to ask and no time to waste, Grace made a quick decision. She adjusted her position and brought the twins closer to her chest, one at a time. She hesitated for only a second, but her concern for them pushed her forward. She allowed Noah to nurse first, and he responded right away. His tiny mouth latched on with hunger and need. For the first time in days, he was eating without resisting. His body relaxed a little, and Grace felt his breathing slow down. It was a strong reaction that showed her she had done the right thing. After Noah, she did the same with Ethan. His response was just as fast. He fed with urgency, as though he had been waiting for this moment. Grace held him close and let him continue until he seemed calm. She stayed quiet, focused completely on them, ignoring everything else. In that moment, nothing mattered except giving them what they needed. As both babies continued feeding, Grace could see the tension slowly leaving their faces. Their cries faded to soft whimpers, and then silence. It had been a long time since the house was quiet like that. She could feel their small bodies resting against hers more peacefully. The room felt still, not because the problems had gone away, but because the twins had finally found some comfort. Grace didn't move too quickly. She wanted them to take as much milk as they needed. She watched their faces closely, noticing how their expressions changed as their hunger was satisfied. Their eyes closed more naturally, not from weakness, but from rest. She stayed seated, not wanting to interrupt the moment. After so many days of struggle, it was a small sign of hope. Grace didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her actions had already spoken for her. She had followed her instincts and helped them in the way only she could. After they had finished feeding, Grace continued to hold them for a few more minutes. She wanted to make sure they were comfortable and not startled. Slowly, she stood up and carried them back to the nursery. She moved carefully so they wouldn't wake. Once there, she placed them in their crib, one after the other, making sure they were lying comfortably. She adjusted their blankets and checked their breathing. Both babies looked more relaxed now. Their bodies didn't seem as tense and their faces looked softer, calmer. Grace watched them for a long time. She could hear them breathing in a regular rhythm, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they were not crying. She felt relieved, but also emotionally drained. The moment had been intense, but she had done what she believed was right. She stayed by the crib for a while longer, watching over them, making sure that they continued to rest in peace. It was a small but important victory. The house stayed silent while the twins slept. There was no noise from Richard's office, and Dr. Whitmore was not around. Grace used the time to clean up slowly, but her mind stayed on the babies. She thought about how quickly they had responded to the breastfeeding. It confirmed what she had feared all along. Something had been missing from their care. She didn't know what would happen next, or if Richard would understand what she had done, but in that moment she didn't care about rules or judgments. Her only goal was to help the twins survive. She walked through the halls quietly, checking again after a few minutes to make sure the babies were still sleeping. They were. She returned to the nursery and sat in a chair next to the crib, feeling tired but also at peace for the first time in days. The silence wasn't cold anymore. It felt like a pause, like the house was finally catching its breath. As the hours passed, Grace remained alert. She didn't go to sleep. Instead, she kept checking on Noah and Ethan. Their breathing was steady, and their skin felt cooler, which meant the fever might be going down. She stayed close, in case they woke up hungry again. She thought about the decision she had made and how quickly it had changed the situation. She wondered if Richard would ever understand or appreciate what had just happened. She didn't need thanks, but she hoped that one day he would realize that she had done something that truly helped. Grace knew that this was only the beginning. The twins would still need more care, and things might not get easier anytime soon. But tonight, at least, she had given them what no one else had. She had listened, acted, and comforted them when they needed it most. As she looked at their sleeping faces, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. While dealing with yet another series of problems at his company, Richard decided to take a short break from the calls and emails to check the most recent recordings from the hidden cameras he had placed around the house. He hadn't had time to review them in the last few days, as the financial situation at his business had become more serious. Investor pressure was growing, and his staff was demanding decisions he couldn't delay any longer. Still, something in the back of his mind reminded him to look at the footage. He needed to know what was happening at home while he was away. He sat in front of the screen and clicked through the files until he reached the newest set. As the video started playing, he expected to see the same routine: Grace moving through the house quietly, taking care of the cleaning and handling the twins. But this time, something different caught his attention almost immediately. The camera had captured a moment that was unlike any other he had seen before. He leaned forward in his chair as the video showed Grace sitting with both babies in her arms. The twins had been crying, their faces red, their little bodies restless. Then he saw Grace holding them close, calming them down with a quiet, steady presence. A few seconds later, she began to breastfeed one of the twins. Richard paused the video for a moment, stunned. He didn't move or say anything. He took a deep breath and pressed play again, watching as Grace continued to feed the babies one at a time, holding them carefully, making sure they were comfortable and supported. The twins slowly stopped crying. Their movements became gentler and their breathing relaxed. The change was visible. Richard could clearly see that they were feeling better. He kept watching, unable to turn away. The image of Grace comforting the babies made him stop and reflect. It was a simple moment, but it carried more meaning than he expected. As the video continued, Richard saw how peaceful the room had become. The house, which had felt heavy and silent for weeks, now looked calm in a new way. The twins were no longer restless. Grace held them for a while, then carefully placed them in the crib. She adjusted their blankets, checked on them again, and stayed nearby to watch over them. Richard could see that the babies were relaxed. Their faces showed comfort and safety. They were no longer stiff with discomfort. Their expressions were soft, their breathing steady. The difference was clear. Richard replayed the moment a second time, then a third. Each time, he paid closer attention to the details. The way Grace moved, how gentle she was, how focused she stayed on the twins. There was no hesitation in her actions, no sign of confusion or fear. She had known exactly what to do, and it had worked. The results were visible right in front of him. He could not ignore it. Watching the entire recording forced Richard to rethink the way he had seen Grace until now. Over the last several weeks, he had doubted her. He had assumed things without proof and even installed cameras to secretly monitor her behavior. His stress had clouded his judgment, and he had believed his suspicions more than the facts in front of him. Now, seeing the reality so clearly, he began to feel the weight of that mistake. Grace had not only done her job, she had gone far beyond it. She had cared for his children in a way that no one else had, including himself. She had noticed what the doctor ignored, and she had acted when the situation became urgent. Richard sat in silence for a few minutes after the video ended. His thoughts were racing, and he didn't know what to say or feel. Part of him felt relief, seeing the twins better. Another part felt guilt, knowing how wrong his assumptions had been. For the rest of the day, the house remained quiet. The babies, after being fed and comforted, rested peacefully in their crib. Grace continued with her usual routine, moving through the house without drawing attention to herself. She didn't know that Richard had watched the video. She simply did what she always did, cleaned the rooms, checked on the twins, and stayed close in case they needed her again. There was a calmness in the air that hadn't been there before. The crying had stopped, and the usual tension felt lighter. Richard passed through the hallway once and glanced into the nursery. The twins were asleep. Grace sat nearby, folding a few clothes, keeping everything organized. It was a normal scene, but now it looked different to him. The peace in the room, the gentle rhythm of care, it all made sense after seeing what had happened earlier. He didn't say anything, but he stayed there for a moment longer before walking away. Later that evening, Richard returned to his office and opened the video file one last time. He watched it from beginning to end again, not out of suspicion this time, but to remind himself of what he had missed before. The more he watched, the more he realized how blind he had been to the truth. Grace had not only earned his trust, she had proven her value through action. She had taken care of the twins when no one else did. She had stayed calm in a situation that could have gotten much worse. The babies were resting now, not because of anything he had done, but because of her. Richard knew he had to carry the weight of his past doubts, but he also knew that something had changed. This day had shown him something important. He still had a long way to go, with the babies, with his business, and with the pain he carried, but he now understood who had been holding things together while he was falling apart. After watching the recordings, Richard began to observe Grace more closely, this time without relying on cameras. He watched her directly as she went about her work, especially when she was with the twins. From the hallway or doorway, he stood silently and noticed how she handled each task. Grace never rushed. She checked the babies' temperature gently, touched their foreheads, and made sure to clean their faces when they were sweaty or fussy. She rocked them in her arms when they cried and placed them back in the crib carefully, making sure the blankets were adjusted just right so they wouldn't feel cold or uncomfortable. These were small details, but to Richard, they stood out. Grace wasn't just following instructions, she was paying attention. She moved through the house with quiet confidence, never distracted or careless. When she noticed Richard watching her, she didn't change her behavior. She didn't act nervous or defensive. Instead, she continued working just as she had before, calm and focused. Grace's calm attitude gave a sense of order to the house, even when things around them felt unstable. She knew Richard was watching her, but she didn't let it affect her. Her only focus was taking care of the babies and making sure everything was clean and in place. At the same time, outside pressure was growing. Emily's family returned to the mansion, this time with more formal intentions. They brought lawyers and came with printed documents and folders. They wanted to talk about custody, and they brought up concerns using medical reports that lacked depth. They claimed these documents showed signs of neglect and used them as reasons to question whether the twins were in a safe environment. The meetings were serious, and the tone was tense. Lawyers from both sides spoke in firm voices, trying to defend their points. Grace stayed nearby during these moments. She held the babies, rocked them when needed, and kept them calm, while the adults argued in the background. Even with the legal conversations going on, Grace stayed completely focused on the twins. She didn't get involved in the discussions, and no one asked her to, but she never left the room when the meetings took place. She wanted to be close in case Noah or Ethan became upset or needed attention. Her presence seemed to help the babies stay calm. They didn't cry during the meetings, even when voices were raised or tension filled the room. Grace gently rocked them or sat quietly with them in her arms, helping them feel safe. Richard noticed this. Between answering legal questions and talking to his lawyers, he glanced over and saw how Grace managed to keep the babies at peace. It made him realize again how important her presence was in the house. While he handled the arguments and complicated decisions, she kept the environment stable. She made it easier for him to focus because he didn't have to worry about the twins during those difficult meetings. Richard had a lot to manage. Between the custody discussions and the continuing problems at his company, his days were full. He moved from meeting to meeting, trying to protect his children's future and also prevent his business from falling apart. It wasn't easy. His phone was always ringing, and emails kept coming in with more issues that needed immediate attention. Despite everything, he tried to stay present in the house. He didn't want to disappear again, like he had in the past weeks. Every evening, when the legal team left and the calls stopped for a short time, Richard would check on the nursery. He saw Grace folding blankets, picking up bottles, or softly speaking to one of the twins. She never asked for praise or recognition. She just kept going. Watching her helped him feel more grounded. She was consistent and reliable, and for now, that was exactly what the household needed. It gave him a small sense of control in a time full of uncertainty. As the lawyers returned day after day, they pushed harder with their claims. They insisted that the environment might not be stable enough for 2 infants. They referred to the medical notes that failed to mention the deeper problems the twins had faced. No one had recorded the full extent of their earlier weakness or how Grace had stepped in to help. Richard listened to everything, responded to questions, and kept his tone firm. He didn't lose his temper, but inside he felt the pressure building. Every part of his life was under a microscope now. He knew that one wrong word or action could be used against him. Still, as he watched Grace handling the daily routine with steady care, it gave him something to hold on to. Her behavior didn't change under pressure. She didn't act differently just because people were visiting. That consistency showed him something important, that her concern for the twins had never been about appearances or approval. It was genuine and constant. By the end of each long day, the atmosphere in the mansion remained quiet but tense. Richard kept thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. The twins, once weak and restless, were more stable now. Grace had made a difference. He saw it not only in their health, but in the way they responded to her voice and touch. The house wasn't perfect, and he still had many battles to face. But he was beginning to see what truly mattered. It wasn't only about legal defense or financial recovery. It was about providing the twins with someone who cared enough to stay present and patient. Grace had done that without being asked, and she continued to do so every hour of the day. Richard still had doubts about many things in his life, but watching Grace now, he no longer questioned her. In the middle of legal threats and corporate chaos, her quiet dedication brought a kind of strength he had not expected to find. With the doctor's influence starting to fade and the twins' condition improving more each day, life inside the mansion began to feel more stable. The constant crying had stopped, replaced by longer periods of rest and occasional soft sounds from the nursery. Grace kept her same calm routine, feeding the babies, checking their temperature, and staying close to them. Her consistent care was showing real results. The babies now had more energy, and their eyes followed movement more clearly. Richard noticed the difference. He no longer heard cries echoing through the halls at all hours. Instead, there were quiet moments of calm. The weight of doubt and tension that had once filled the house began to lift slightly. Although his business problems were still serious, Richard found that he could breathe a little more easily at home. Grace never asked for recognition, but her work was visible in every small change. The mansion was no longer falling apart. It had become a place of recovery, day by day. Richard began spending more time in the house, especially in the evenings. Between one meeting and another, he now made time to sit at the kitchen table. Grace would prepare something simple, and they would sit down to eat together. These shared meals became a small but important part of their daily routine. At first, the conversations were short and focused on the babies, how they had eaten, how they had slept, or what small progress Grace had noticed. But slowly, the conversations expanded to include things like supplies for the house, future checkups, or small household decisions. There was no need for long speeches or deep emotional talk. The communication between them was practical and respectful, shaped by the situation they were both living in. Richard listened more and asked more questions about the babies. Grace answered simply, always focused on what was best for the children. The meals didn't erase the pressure he felt from work, but they added a small sense of routine he had been missing. The twins clearly responded to Grace's care. Their bodies looked healthier. They had more strength in their small arms and legs, and their expressions became more alert. When Grace held them, they stayed calm longer. They started to sleep more regularly, with fewer interruptions during the night. Feeding time was easier too. Their sucking reflex had improved, and they finished their bottles more often. Grace paid attention to every small change. She adjusted their schedule to match their growing needs and stayed close during the night, ready to comfort them if they stirred. Richard observed this change with quiet relief. He began to realize that the babies had needed something more personal and responsive than the doctor had provided. Grace had filled that gap with patience and instinct. The improvement in Noah and Ethan was not something that could be denied. Their stronger behavior was the result of days of consistent care. Richard was no longer just watching from a distance. He was now learning to trust what he was seeing. As the legal conversations about custody continued, the lawyers requested new medical evaluations for the twins. They argued that fresh reports were needed to assess the baby's current condition, especially after the earlier documents had been based on limited and outdated observations. Richard, after reviewing the original medical notes himself, noticed clear inconsistencies. The reports didn't reflect the twins' recent progress, and they ignored several warning signs that Grace had mentioned weeks ago. That made him take action. He arranged for new evaluations with different professionals, people not connected to the previous doctor. He wanted accurate information this time, reports that showed the truth. This decision wasn't just about the legal process anymore. It was about giving the babies the right care and support. Grace didn't comment much on the change, but she welcomed the idea quietly. She continued with her daily responsibilities, focused on the immediate needs of the twins. Richard, now more aware of the situation, took each step more carefully than before. As the days moved forward, the connection between Richard and Grace became more cooperative. There was no sudden change or dramatic shift in their relationship. Instead, it developed naturally through shared responsibilities. Richard no longer saw Grace only as the housekeeper. She had proven her importance through action. She handled the household quietly, solved problems before they became bigger, and cared for the babies with deep attention. Richard started involving her more when decisions needed to be made, asking her opinion and relying on her experience. Grace, in turn, respected his space and followed his guidance where necessary. The house felt more balanced. Even with the challenges from the business and the stress of the custody situation, the mansion no longer felt like it was falling apart. It was functioning again, even if only just. Each person had their role, and both were trying their best. Grace continued doing her part, not because she was asked, but because she had taken on that responsibility from the beginning. Even in the middle of these difficulties, Richard found moments where he could pause and think more clearly. He knew the road ahead was still uncertain, his company needed recovery, and the legal fight for custody had not ended. But when he looked around the house now, he no longer saw complete disorder. He saw signs of progress, signs of stability. That mattered. He could sit down for a meal, hear the babies resting, and talk to someone who understood the situation without making things harder. Grace had shown herself to be more than what he expected. Her presence had become a part of the house's recovery. Richard didn't say much about it directly, but his actions showed recognition. He gave her more space to manage things, more trust in how she handled the children, and more openness in daily conversations. The house was still quiet, but the silence no longer felt like grief. It felt like something rebuilding slowly, shaped by care, effort, and a shared goal to keep going. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Now that you've finished watching this incredible story, click on my profile picture and access my videos. I'm sure you'll be enchanted by all the good stories about justice and kindness. Enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.